We end the month of February on the channel with a special Thursday review, as today we're going to be looking at Invasion of the Body Snatchers, released in 1978. Directed by Philip Kaufman, Invasion of the Body Snatchers is based off the 1955 novel The Body Snatchers by Jack Finney, and also a remake of a film, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which came out in 1956. This film centers around two health inspectors in San Francisco that begin to notice weird things going on. People they know suddenly don't have any emotion and are congregating with people that they didn't know previously. And they soon come to learn that the people they thought they knew aren't the people they know at all. In fact, they've been replaced by aliens who have snatched their bodies and duplicated them. The two main characters were Matthew Bennell, played by Donald Sutherland, and Elizabeth Driscoll, played by Brooke Adams. There were three other main characters that were kind of like side main characters or a bit lesser main characters in the sense that they didn't appear as much as the main two, who were Jack and Nancy Bellick, played by Jeff Goldblum and Veronica Cartwright, and Dr. David Kipner, played by Leonard Nimoy. On a budget of about $25 million, the film would make about that back at the box office. At the time of release, it had varied critical reception. However, over time and nowadays, it's recognized as one of the greatest remakes of all time, one of the greatest book adaptations of all time, and one of the greatest science fiction horror films of all time. But were our main characters able to stay themselves, or did they also have their bodies snatched? We're going to find out right now as we look at Invasion of the Body Snatchers, released in 1978. So our film begins on a dying planet with a race of translucent creatures escaping it. They take off into the solar system in search of a new home, and they finally settle on one, the planet Earth. They fall into San Francisco disguising themselves as rain droplets, and then form flowers with pods on the end. One of the flowers is picked up by Elizabeth, who works at the health department and lives with her boyfriend Jeffrey, who's a dentist. We meet our other main character, Matthew, who also works at the health department as an inspector. He and Elizabeth are close friends, and he calls her that night to see if she'll come in early to help work on an experiment. Elizabeth awakes before 7 to find Jeffrey already dressed and cleaning up the debris of that flower she brought home, and acting very strange, distant, and emotionless. She goes to work with Matthew and notices a bunch of other people at the job are also looking very strange as well. Upon going home that night, Jeffrey goes out to a meeting, and again, he's acting very strange. She then goes to dinner at Matthew's place and asks him if she's crazy. Matthew doesn't think so, but he does think that she should talk to Dr. David Kipner, a psychiatrist who's a friend of his, so he could help put things in perspective. Also, it wasn't flat out said whether or not these two were having an affair, but I feel like they might have been, because let's just say they're very close. They are very close. The tension is very palpable. The next day, Matthew goes to a dry cleaner to have some of his shirts cleaned, and the man who owns it asks if Matthew's a doctor. He expresses the need to find one because he's convinced that his wife is no longer his wife. Matthew begins to notice other people acting strange and then finally runs into Elizabeth at the health department, where she's very upset. In a flashback, it's revealed that she went to Jeffrey's office that morning, but he wasn't there. She then looked out the window and saw him congregating with a group of random people who she swore he had never met before. She then followed him around all day, and he just kept having random meetings with random people at random places around town. Matthew takes her on a drive until they're confronted by a frantic man claiming that they're coming for us. He's then chased down by a group of people before getting hit by a car and killed. And fun fact, that now dead character is played by Kevin McCarthy, who starred in the '56 version of this film. They then head to Kipner's book signing, where they also meet Matthew's friend Jack, who's a disgruntled poet. As Matthew attempts to report the incident that took place earlier to the police, Elizabeth sees Kipner trying to talk down a woman who claims her husband isn't really her husband anymore. Afterwards, Kipner has a similar conversation with Elizabeth where she confides that she thinks her boyfriend isn't her boyfriend anymore, but he thinks it's just a psychological issue and that she's trying to get out of her relationship. Jack, meanwhile, goes back and meets his wife Nancy at their mud bath business. Matthew, meanwhile, takes Elizabeth home where they call out for Jeffrey, but he doesn't respond. Although he's in there, he's just lurking around the corner. Back at the mud bath house, Nancy finds a corpse, but it's no ordinary corpse. It's a corpse that kinda looks like Jack. They call Matthew over and have him examine it, and Matthew decides he needs to make sure Elizabeth's alright. He calls her, but she's unable to talk as it looks like her skin's peeling, and Jeffrey's watching over her. Uh-oh. While Matthew heads over there, Nancy stares at the apparent corpse while Jack takes a nap. As soon as Jack falls asleep, the corpse's eyes open, and then Jack wakes back up and its eyes close, but its nose starts to bleed. Matthew breaks into Elizabeth and Jeffrey's apartment through the back way and going up into her room, finds another version of Elizabeth growing in an outside garden. He then takes the real Elizabeth out of the house before Jeffrey has time to notice. Meanwhile, Kipner arrives at the bathhouse and looks for the corpse with Jack and Nancy. That's right, the corpse is gone, although the back window is open. Matthew and a now awake Elizabeth arrive, and Matthew calls the police to report Jeffrey. While Elizabeth and Nancy go to Matthew's apartment, Matthew, Kipner, and Jack go into Jeffrey's apartment with the detectives to see the separate Elizabeth, which is no longer there. And after Matthew accidentally confesses to breaking and entering, Kipner's able to get him out of it after convincing the detective that Matthew's just having an episode. All back at Matthew's department, they're trying to deduce what's going on, and Nancy thinks she has it figured out. In fact, she does. People are being replaced by alien pod people, which, yeah, is exactly what's going on, although Kipner's not buying it. Kipner then gives Matthew a number for some government contacts and goes out into his car that has Jeffrey in it, revealing that Kipner is actually a duplicate and possibly might have been the entire time we've known him. Back at the apartment, Jack is sniffing one of the flowers, and Elizabeth and Nancy deduce that that's how they're doing it, through the flowers. Matthew spends most of the next day trying to contact multiple government agencies, who all turn him away and tell him to stop making stuff up, hinting that they already might be compromised. Speaking of compromise, the same day at the health department, Elizabeth meets that woman who previously was hysterical about her husband, and is seemingly now fine. Later that night, Kipner comes to the apartment again and gives the others some things to help them sleep, and tells Matthew that he should get some sleep as well. And outside while keeping watch, he does fall asleep, which allows one of the flowers to take in his essence or whatever, and it starts making duplicates of him and his friends. Luckily, Nancy didn't take any of the sleepy time stuff and is able to wake Matthew up. Matthew then calls the police, but they already know his name before he gives it to them, revealing that they too are compromised. Matthew tells the others that it's time to get out of the house and run, but not before he destroys his own duplicate, which pisses some of the other duplicates off, and they begin to chase them. It's difficult to avoid the duplicates as they call to each other and point humans out by pointing at them, literally, and screaming. They run away for a bit until they're backed into a corner by a fence. When they see a helicopter, which is also probably compromised, Jack decides to run out and create a diversion while the other three get away, although Nancy runs after him. Now back to two main characters again. They're followed through the city until they get in a taxi cab and asked to go to the airport. The taxi cab driver unfortunately is also compromised and tries to lead them to the others before they're able to escape. They finally end up back at the health department, where they take speed in order to stay awake. They're then ambushed and absconded, however, by some duplicates, including Kipner and the newly duplicated Jack. Kipner, who seems to maybe be the de facto leader among the body snatchers, rationalizes this by telling them that they're simply making them into better versions of themselves. He gives Matthew and Elizabeth both a sedative that's supposed to put them to sleep, but it doesn't work, luckily, because of the speed. And since it didn't put them to sleep, Matthew is able to knock out Kipner and kill Jack's duplicate. They lock Kipner in a freezer and run into Nancy, who luckily is still herself. And not only that, but she's figured out how to fool the aliens. Basically, they don't have any emotions, so you can't show any emotions either. This works for a little bit until Elizabeth sees a dog with a man's face on it and screams, and her and Matthew flee. They get in the back of a truck which takes them to a food processing plant, only it's not that anymore, now it's more of a pod processing plant. Elizabeth also injures her ankle and is unable to walk, so they hide in the bushes, where they profess their love to one another. They then hear Amazing Grace on bagpipes coming from a cruise ship, so Matthew goes over to check it out. He doesn't find humans, however, he just finds more pods being loaded on, realizing that they're going to be taken to different parts of the world. He probably shouldn't have left Elizabeth alone, however, as he comes back to find her unconscious and peeling. She does a lot more than that, however, though, as she completely disintegrates in his arms. Tony Stark, eat your heart out. And then a duplicate version of Elizabeth immediately rises up, causing Matthew to flee into the processing plant. Not knowing what to do now, Matthew climbs up onto the roof and just goes full fuck it and starts cutting wires and destroys the entire place. Matthew then once again flees from the duplicates, seemingly evading them by hiding under a bridge. The next day, Matthew sees non-duplicated children apparently about to be duplicated as they're taken into a feeder to have nap time. He also returns to work where he sees duplicate Elizabeth and tries not to show any emotion. After work, he begins to walk towards City Hall, where Nancy, who is still human as well, finds him. But yeah, it turns out Matthew was not faking the no emotion thing, as he then distorts his face and points and screams at Nancy as she screams back and the camera zooms into his mouth to end the movie. And the end credits to this film are short, but one of the greatest end credits I've ever seen because there is no music. There is nothing. They play absolutely nothing but silence in the end credits, truly symbolizing that Nancy is alone. And this film's twist ending, which is recognized as one of the greatest of all time, is one of the things that helped it stand out initially from the book and from the first film. The ending was crafted by Philip Kaufman as well as Kevin McCarthy and Don Siegel, who was the director of the original film. Also forgot to mention that taxi driver earlier, that was Don Siegel. And after they came up with the ending, McCarthy kept it secret from everybody except for screenwriter W.D. Richter and producer Robert Solo. According to Kaufman, he only informed Donald Sutherland of the ending the night before, and it's entirely possible that Veronica Cartwright didn't even know until Sutherland turned to point at her. Hell, the studio executive didn't even learn about the ending until a cut was screened for them. And while the ending does summarize everything very well, it's so much more than just its ending, as this really is quintessential science fiction horror. The science fiction part obviously being the aliens, but this is one of the best types of horror in my opinion, because there wasn't even necessarily anything scary in this movie. That's the brilliance of it. Like, horror doesn't necessarily need scares. I'm not sure if there was a single scare this entire movie. Certainly not a jump scare or really anything much scary at all, unless you count Donald Sutherland's face at the end. It was just the pure feeling of being alone, the emphasization at the end that there really was just one human left, and basically just a feeling of doom. That's the best way to emphasize horror, is doom. And this film was just pure doom. I mean, you gotta know Nancy probably didn't make it out of there, you know? Everyone dies at the end. Whole world's fucked. Philip Kaufman also noted that he thought the film was timely as the Jonestown mass suicides had just happened a month earlier and were still dominating the news, and he said, and I quote, "That was the case a lot of people from San Francisco were looking for a better world and suddenly found themselves in a pod dome and it was fatal. It could not have been more of a pointed reason for watching the movie." However, considering the movie didn't do incredibly well at the box office, I do wonder if the Jonestown Massacre played a part in people not seeing it as much. Maybe they didn't want to relate with the movie. Maybe they wanted to escape from stuff like that, and maybe if it hadn't come out at the time of that happening, it would have done better. I don't know, but that's just my opinion. But regardless of the time, again, it's now recognized as one of the greatest films ever. I would absolutely recommend it to you if you've never seen this, and I would put this on a short list that I've mentioned before of essential films. If you're looking to see some of the greatest films ever made, if you're looking to make a list of greatest films ever made, this has to be on that list. And to be honest, in no particular order, I might have to put this top 3 as far as science fiction horror goes, with this, Alien, and John Carpenter's The Thing. And maybe we'll look at those two at some point in the future, but for now, that is it for my review of Invasion of the Body Snatchers 1978. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. Seriously. But that is it for me today and for the month of February. I'll be back with more reviews next month. But that is it for me today. Thank you guys for watching. If you liked the video, be sure to leave it a like. If you didn't like it, don't. If you want to follow any of my social media links, they're all in the video description down below. Thank you to all my patrons also who are named in the video description for supporting me and my channels. I appreciate you guys. With all that being said though, my name is Noah Taff. This has been my review of Invasion of the Body Snatchers released in 1978. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye.